Have you ever paused and asked yourself, who am I really? It's a simple question, but the answer isn't always easy. Self awareness is like holding up a mirror to your inner world, your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs. But how often do we really look? And more importantly, how often do we see? And today's episode is all about self awareness. What is it? Why it's important, and how understanding yourself can change the way you experience life. Because the more you know yourself, the more power you have to shape your life. Joining me today is a special guest who is here to share simple and practical insights on self awareness, making it easier to understand and apply in our daily lives. So stick around till the end because there is so much value. But before I bring him on, let me introduce myself. My name is Ruhi, and I'm the host of Let's Align podcast. I strive to use this podcast as a platform for conversations that ignite new ideas, encourage deep thinking, and foster personal growth. I just want to thank you all for taking the time to be here with me. Your support for this podcast keeps me inspired to bring you the best content possible. Our guest today is David Brown, who is a leadership coach, connecting mind and body to evoke the peace and goodness that is our essence. He supports people to become more emotionally aware and therefore brings the whole of themselves to all aspects of their lives. I'm so excited to have you here on my show. Welcome, David, and how are you?
I am very well, thank you, Ruhi, and thank you for inviting me to be a guest on your wonderful podcast.
I'm honored to have you here. So, thank you so much for being on my show. Firstly, David, let me ask you this. When you're not helping your clients with coaching, what do you like to do for fun?
What do I like to do for fun? I love to walk, and I love to walk in nature. So there's something about like the majesty of
Mm-hmm.
nature that um, I feel awed by it and humbled by it, and at the same time, I find it really inspiring to be my full self, my best self. So I sort of see that mirror in nature and in myself.
That's so nice. You really get an opportunity to walk in the nature. So, thanks for sharing that. Let's get into the conversation. To start, how would you personally define emotional awareness and why do you think it's such an essential part of personal growth?
So my definition of emotional awareness
Mm-hmm.
is, well, I would say that it is body based first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you watch a very young child express their emotions, they're not thinking words, they're feeling, they're having an experience, and their expression of that experience is very organic and it's very natural. And I think in essence, what emotional awareness is, or emotional intelligence is being connected to that experience, that sense of oneself in the moment. The expression of that is something that becomes maybe more refined with language, like we can find like a baby will express itself very, very clearly, when it's upset or when it's joyful or when it's nervous or when it's confused or shocked or startled, it will do that. But when we try to bring language to that, spoken language to that, that is that's like another level. And if we're not careful, that level, like there becomes a disconnect between the experience and the expression of that experience. So when we lose that, it's like there's this imbalance between our mental maturity and our emotional maturity. And for most of us, in my experience, there's this massive gap between how emotionally mature we are and how mentally mature we are. And I think the journey of self awareness, the journey of self growth,
Mm-hmm.
is to rebalance that so that our emotional maturity aligns with our mental maturity, so that we can find ways of being able to express ourselves authentically in words and to be able to express our emotions in words in a very authentic way.
That's a great way to look at it. And it's true. Understanding our emotions definitely helps us respond better instead of just reacting. It's such an important part of growing as a person. Now, what are some of the most common emotional blind spots that people have? And how do you think we become more aware of them in ourselves and others?
So I think our emotional blind spots start from our childhood, when as children we express our emotions in a like an unedited way, and then our parents, our caregivers, our teachers, the adults in our lives express some kind of, they don't like the way that we've expressed ourselves. So they might not like us being really joyful. They might not like us being angry. They might not like us being sad. And so what they do is they shut us down and they stop us from, they make it bad and they make it wrong that we express ourselves in that way. And I think what happens then is, as young children, we find ways to edit ourselves so that we can stay in favor with our parents and our teachers and our caregivers. We kind of play the role of good boy or good girl, and we only smile a certain amount, we're only upset a little amount, but just enough so that our parents don't get upset or send us to our bedroom, or all those things that parents can do that make us known that we're like in trouble and that we've done something bad. So I think for every person it's different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think essentially, broadly, those stronger emotions like joy and anger are probably two of the big areas where people have their blind spots. And we don't allow ourselves to express those emotions, but also because of our training from our childhood, we don't often allow ourselves to feel those emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's that, so we kind of go through this sort of process of numbing ourselves continually so that eventually we don't even feel angry about things. We don't even feel joyful about things. And I think that that's a real shame, because life is about this kind of broad spectrum of emotions. And a fulfilling life is a life that allows us to, or that we have the freedom to express all of those emotions across the full spectrum. And if we don't allow ourselves that, then life in some way is muted, and the color. I can't remember the name of the film, but there's this wonderful film set in the future, and people have to take a drug to suppress their emotion. And the film is originally it's begun to be filmed just in black and white. So it kind of creates this metaphor
Mm-hmm.
for, when we're not able to experience our full range of emotions, life feels quite black and white. It feels quite plain and bland. But the hero of the story goes on this journey of discovering his emotions, and the filming of it becomes more and more and more in vivid color. And I think that's the journey that we go on when we reconnect with our emotions,
Mm-hmm.
that life becomes much, much more vivid and fulfilling and meaningful, because we're connected, we reconnect to our emotions and we're able to express them.
I think I'm definitely going to Google the name of that movie that you mentioned just now,
Yeah.
because it,
I
it
will let
looks
you
so
know. If you
creative.
can't find it, I'll let you know. But yeah, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
But I think that's a very valid point. We often miss patterns in our behaviors or emotions until they really start affecting our decisions or relationships itself. Now, why do you think so many people struggle with identifying and understanding their emotions?
Put simply, they're out of practice. It's as simple as that. You're not allowed to experience anger, or you're not allowed to experience joy. I keep using those examples, but you can apply it to any emotion, and you don't even know that you're experiencing that. So it's like your body becomes like, when you have an emotion and you can't express it, my understanding of that is that the emotion gets trapped in the body in some way. So often that might appear as like muscular tension, but it could also appear as like inflammation in the belly, or it could be stress, or it could be like brain fog, or it could be like erratic movement where someone can't stay still, or it might be too much stillness, right? But whatever the reason, there's this trapping of emotion in the body. And when the body is consistently tense and stressed, we lose this ability to be able to feel. Like if you make a tight fist and you dig your fingers into your hand, it hurts much less than if you relax your hand and you dig your finger into it, because there's less tension in the muscles. So you feel more when you're relaxed.
Yeah.
Okay. And when young children learn from their adults and their carers that emotions are bad or that emotions are wrong, then all of that training kind of translates into, it's bad that I feel this emotion. Like, I have a client right now who was brought up by a mother who deeply disliked the expression of emotion. And so this client has this belief that when she is joyful or upset about things, there's something wrong. Like there's something wrong with her life if she's experiencing those things. Like she's learned to believe that her life should be calm and balanced and like a flat line like this. And it's taken her many years of work to come to this realization that actually emotions are like a natural part of life and that they're very important, and that part of our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health is to be able to express our emotions and to feel them.
That's true. And I also believe that many people are not taught how to understand or express their emotions, and sometimes it feels easier to ignore them than to face them head on. There's also this fear of being vulnerable, which can make it harder to open up even to ourselves. And I think all these elements really add up of why many people struggle in identifying their own emotions. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely. Well, I think vulnerability, I think Brené Brown has done all the so much research on this, but I love her connection with this idea of vulnerability and courage. And one of the things that I love about that work is that the word courage comes from the French word cœur, which means the heart. So for me, it really strongly points to this ability to feel and express our emotions, and that it takes courage to do that. And the act of expressing your emotions is a very vulnerable act. Like you're making it very clear to somebody that you are displeased, or that you are upset, or that you're feeling guilty, or that you're feeling shame, or that you're feeling discomfort, or whatever it may be. And you put yourself in this vulnerable position when you express that for somebody to weaponize it, or to be cruel to you in some way, or to make fun in some way. And that's always, a risk that we take when we express our emotions. And why people would weaponize it, why people would be cruel, is because they've learned that to exploit. And I think that people that do that are disconnected from their own emotions. So I think that there's this strong correlation between I'm not connected to my body, I'm not connected to my emotions, I'm not connected to how I'm feeling. And so therefore there's this numbness that means that I can behave unkindly to myself and to other people, and that's okay, because to them it feels okay.
Making it a norm.
Yeah, making it a norm, but also making it like it's big. It's not a big deal, like they should, like it doesn't affect them as much as it, you have license to do that. And I think that it's plainly wrong. But I think that that's the understanding that I think a lot of people, grow up with, particularly when they don't have this connection to their emotions.
Yeah. And I think we are often so focused on getting things done that we don't take time to pause and really check in as to how we are feeling. But as you mentioned, recognizing and understanding emotions is such an important part of one's personal growth and definitely building the healthy relationships. Now,
So I'll just say, if I can just say to that then, that if we're going to go on the journey of reconnecting to our bodies and reconnecting to our emotions, I think we do need to slow down and take the time to notice the emotions that we're feeling and what wants to be expressed. And of course, if you're out of practice,
mhm.
then you kind of really need to very purposefully and decisively slow yourself down so that you can experience what you're feeling. When you become a black belt in emotions, then you can do it on the run. Then you can do it in the moment. And that is a really, really powerful leadership skill, a really powerful relationship skill, because you're able to run with how you're feeling and manage that and regulate that in the moment. And that is, that's like an advanced games move. But I think that that's where people want to be heading towards.
Yeah, I think introspection is really important, as you called out, slowing down and actually recognizing how exactly you're feeling. That's important. Now, what do you think? What role does emotional awareness play in building healthier relationships, be it professional or personal?
Well, I think it's everything. Without emotional connection, without emotional awareness, you cannot really interact and relate to people. So when you have done the work yourself to understand how emotions work within you, I think it gives you this really powerful empathy to be able to have an understanding and a sense of what somebody else is experiencing. So as all of this self-development work, it starts from the inside and then it goes outwards. So I think, firstly, we have to have our own emotional intelligence based on our own experience and our own understanding of how life works and how life unfolds for us. It gives us this mirror to understand how it can be for other people. And then that allows us to have empathy, but it also allows us to be compassionate with people, which I think is really important in work situations and in relationship. But it also allows us to be in this position where we can lovingly challenge people as well.
Yeah.
Say to them something like, like, I appreciate that you're upset about this, but that doesn't mean that it's like appropriate for you to storm out of the room or, whatever, in a professional context. As an example, being able to give an acknowledgement of the challenge that someone is experiencing in their work environment, but also to point them to what the expectations are,
Mhm.
of people's self-management, I think is also incredibly important. So kind of knowing that journey for yourself allows you to manage other people
Mhm.
as they go on that journey for themselves as well.
From what you said just now, I can definitely say that emotional awareness is all about the foundation for the healthier relationships. And when we understand our emotions, we are better able to communicate clearly, set boundaries, and respond with empathy. How do you think? Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I'm just trying to think of a really like a good example that really speaks to that. So for example, I mean, my own experience was as a young man whose parents felt very uncomfortable around strong emotion. And so when I would strongly express myself as a boy or as a young man, my parents really didn't know how to be with it. So it kind of felt a little bit like I was like out in the middle of the sea and I was just shouting out into the space and there was like nothing coming back, like no one was really hearing me. So as I grew up into an adult and into a man, I learned that there was no point in expressing my emotions and I lost complete connection with my emotions. So that when I got married to a woman who needed or wanted a lot of emotional intimacy, I just didn't even know what to do. I mean, it was really painful to see her ask for what she wanted and for me to have no sense of what she was talking about. I mean, it was a complete mystery to me. And unfortunately, I didn't do the work quickly enough, early enough in our relationship. And unfortunately, we separated. But that separation was a catalyst for me to begin to do the work of understanding what these feelings and emotions were and to be able to express them. And now I'm in a much stronger position to be able to express myself in my intimate relationship, but also with my clients and my work colleagues. And it just makes for much, much stronger bonds between people because people feel seen and people feel heard. And I think most of us, if not all of us, deep down, we crave to be seen and to be heard and understood by other people. And I think if you as a person can offer that to people, it's just so invaluable, so invaluable.
I think it's like giving ourselves permission to feel without judgment, which can be incredibly freeing experience.
Yeah, it is an incredibly freeing experience, but to feel and give no judgment to myself because you can't control what other people think.
Absolutely.
So the other side to this is that other people will judge you. That is inevitable. There's always a judgment. But if you cannot judge yourself, then that gives you that freedom to be able to go, okay, I'm good with what I'm feeling and I'm good with what I'm expressing. And I appreciate that people will have something to say about that, but that doesn't undervalue or undermine what it is that I'm experiencing. And so I feel that I need to express that or I want to express that.
So, if I may ask you, in your view, how does emotional awareness contribute to overall mental health and resilience?
So I used to be, so in the UK, where I'm based, we have a charitable service that is called the Samaritans. So people can ring up at any time of the day, anywhere in the country, and they can speak to somebody who will listen to
Hmm.
them when they are in distress. Doesn't matter what they're in distress about, but they can they can speak, and they can speak for as long as they want. So there's no limit to that. And the thing that I really noticed about that, one of the themes that I really noticed about that, is when people can't express themselves, it's like the energy builds up in them and it manifests as a kind of an anxiety or as a stress, right? And so when people are able to express themselves, that anxiety and that stress decreases. So I think the most important, or the most valuable thing, I think that, or one of the valuable things that emotional intelligence or emotional awareness gives us, is this ability to be able to help us regulate and manage our own health and our well-being. And it isn't just mental health, of course, it's physical, our physical health as well, and our spiritual health as well. So I think the more deeply we can acknowledge our own experience, just to ourselves, I think is incredibly important. And then to have people around us that we can also acknowledge that, who will acknowledge that as well, I think is also really valuable. So we have self-regulation, but we also have co-regulation, right? The ability to be able to be regulated by other people around us as well, right? And that we help to regulate them. So, we're not isolated, we're social creatures. So it isn't enough to be able to do this for ourselves. We need to be able to do it in the context of other people as well, and do that in relationship to other people. Yeah, I'll stop there.
So, coming to your point, when you spoke about self regulation and co regulation, do you really think it needs a lot of work, especially for the self regulation for any individual?
A lot of work? What do you mean by a lot of work?
I'm pretty sure it's all about having those conscious efforts. For instance, if I am feeling upset about something, but unless I understand why am I feeling it, is it the situation or is it the pattern that I'm upset about, or what's making me upset? For me to have that understanding as well, I think I need to make those conscious efforts at regular intervals to know that, okay, this is something that's making me upset, that's making me think or feel certain way. So in that context, do you think it needs a lot of work for someone who isn't in that space at that moment, at this in the present moment?
So what I'm understanding in what you're saying is, so the emotion that we're feeling, I think there are kind of layers to this. And one of those layers is what is actually happening in this situation. So the being able to see the situation with real clarity, and a little bit like a mirror. Like if I hold a mirror up to you, you just see your perfect reflection, right? So if you're really self-aware and you have really good emotional awareness, then you will be able to see situations as they are with real clarity, and you're not clouding that by any of your beliefs or judgments or assumptions or prejudices that you might hold. But most of us aren't that clean. And most of us have a whole bunch of assumptions and judgments and prejudices about all kinds of things. And it's those prejudices and assumptions and judgments that actually contribute to our emotional experience, right? So they can add layers onto our emotional experience, which means that we don't see the situation as it is. We see it as we perceive it to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which complicates things immensely. Right. But we're not. So it means that we're not in a position to be able to respond effectively to what is really taking place in front of us.
That's so true. And when we actually understand what we are feeling and why, it definitely helps us to process the emotions in the most healthier way instead of letting them build up or overwhelm us.
Well, so I think what we have to, in order to get to that place of having a really clear mirror, we want to be doing the inner work of understanding. Just want to make sure I get the words right. We want to make sure that we understand why we're feeling what we're feeling. What are the beliefs that we hold? Means, for example, that I'm angry about something. Now, if you're angry about an injustice, then I think it's important to understand why you feel that that thing is an injustice, because you can kind of get yourself caught up in the beliefs of that, and that cannot necessarily be of service. So I'll give you an example. So rather than talking hypothetically, so I have a belief about people being late. Yeah. So if I say to somebody, I'm going to be there at 5 o'clock, then my expectation is that they're going to be there at 5 o'clock. And if they're not there, then if I'm not careful, my belief system means that I make a whole bunch of assumptions that they're disrespecting me, that they don't value my time, that I'm not important to them. I'm making all kinds of stuff up, right? And that can lead me to be in a really strong emotional place where I get upset or I get angry, or that, I might like withdraw from the relationship and, and pull away. There could be all kinds of reactions that I could have to that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when I understand that that is how I respond to those situations, they're my reactions to those situations, then I can manage that. But also what I can do, I can kind of take it to another level, and I can begin to really challenge the beliefs that I hold about, well, does this person really disrespect me? Yeah. Does this person really not value my time? And the chances is that I have a host of beliefs that sit underneath that have come from my past experience. And if I can free myself of that, then I'm in a much better position to go, they're late. I wonder why they're late. And for it not to be this big thing that I create for myself that has only come from my beliefs.
So you're saying that it's rather about challenging our own beliefs?
Yeah. Yeah. Because our emotions, so if you think of it like a circle,
Mm-hmm.
and we start the circle at a point where your thinking, your beliefs generate how you feel, and how you feel generates your behavior, and your behavior creates outcomes, and those outcomes reinforce your thinking, right? So it goes around like that. Most people try and change their behavior.
Okay.
And that's okay. Like, it works quite well. And it is important to be able to, as I say, feel what you feel, but also be able to realize, learn to manage it and regulate it. But the advanced move is to go back to your thinking and to look at your thinking and understand what your thinking is doing that generates those feelings, that generates that behavior, right? So if you think, if someone's late, they're disrespecting me, then that creates a feeling, that creates a behavior, that creates an outcome that reinforces the thinking, right? But if I change that and I go, this person's late, I hope they're okay. I hope something hasn't gone wrong. Maybe something important's come up that means that they can't, maybe they lost their mobile phone, whatever it might be. But very quickly from that thinking, now my feelings aren't one of anger. My feelings are one of compassion. Now, instead of sending them a really angry voice note, I might actually not send anything, or I might send a compassionate voice note that says something like, God, I hope everything's okay, and let's rearrange, or whatever. And then the outcomes of that might be, instead of me being angry, which means that this person doesn't want to have anything to do with me, this person might actually be like, God, it's just been such a difficult day, and it was so nice to get your message, because I've just had nothing but complaints from people all day, and your message was really lovely. Let's meet and have a drink, another day, and all of that is driven by our thinking, our beliefs.
Yeah, it's all about changing the narrative that really drives us to this thought process.
Exactly. Right. So our emotions are a subjective thing. Our emotions that we feel are very personal, and lost my train of thought. Emotions are subjective, yeah, and we can change them so that we're in a position to be able to respond differently to things. Yeah.
So what are some of the practical steps or exercises that you would recommend for someone who is trying to become more emotionally aware, at least in their daily life?
Yeah. So one of the things that really worked for me was I've just got my little list of notes of practical tips, so I just want to make sure that I don't miss any. So the one that really helps me, or at least helped me to begin with, was to put some alarms on my phone through the day for a 30-second exercise where I check in with myself and I ask myself 3 questions. How am I now? Where do I feel it? So where do I feel it in my body, this thing? And how do I know? So how am I now? How do I know how I am, and where do I feel it in my body? Okay. And what that does is it just creates this interrupt in the day where you can go, okay, I'm just going to pause from whatever I'm doing, when it's appropriate, of course, but I'm going to pause and I'm just going to ask myself, how am I feeling? So when I do that for myself right now, I feel a little bit hot, I feel a little bit nervous, I'm on camera, I'm speaking to you, I'm on stage, so I'm feeling that. So that's how I am. And how do I know it? Well, I'm feeling quite hot and I can feel some tension in my tummy. And again, where do I feel it? In my head, in my belly. And it's just this way of developing some element, some amount of awareness of how I am in this present moment. And for me, that was a really, really valuable starting point. And then what we can do is when we ask that question, how am I now? There's a resource called the emotion wheel or the feeling wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Think different organizations call it different things. And in the center of this wheel, there are maybe like 6 or 8 different emotions. Like I can send you a link to something if your listeners would like that resource.
Sure.
But there are kind of like, like there's sad, there's happy, there's excited, there's some kind of quite broad emotions in the center. And then as you go out to the next level, it's like you're breaking down those bigger emotions or broader emotions into more defined and nuanced things. And then there's a third layer where it's even more defined and even more nuanced. So what I've found with that wheel is that it kind of it helps to give me language to the feelings that I'm having, and that's really, really helpful as well. So being quite serious about and committed to this process of being emotionally more aware and
Mm-hmm.
being more articulate, I think is really, really important. And then another thing that I've found, which for me is what really powerful or some aspects of really powerful life coaching can be, is again back to this wheel, this circle that I was talking about. Not to work with the behaviors themselves, but to work with the thinking that comes with those feelings and those behaviors. So to begin to sort of challenge some of that thinking can be really, really helpful, because it begins to address the kind of the deeper roots of the emotions that we're experiencing, which is also really valuable.
I think those are some really helpful suggestions. And I also believe that it's during this entire process, it's very, very important to be patient. Is that right?
Really, really patient. Yeah, it's a lifelong, it's a lifelong process. And like when you look at, so things like meditation can also be really helpful, because like Buddhist meditation practice, one of the things that they talk about is when you're meditating, if you imagine that your mind is like the sky and that emotions are like the clouds that travel across the sky. So your emotions are not you. Your emotions are things that you're experiencing. So if you observe, say, anger or sadness or joy or whatever, but if you observe it, then you are able to kind of see it for what it is, which is an emotion, and it isn't you. So what you can also then do is you can begin to play with the language of that, right? So rather than saying, I am angry, which is kind of making it all about, this is what I am angry. You begin to realize that there's this separation. So then people start to use the language like, I noticed that I am feeling angry. And that is a huge step, because most people just get really locked into being angry or being sad or being stressed or being upset. But actually, it's no, they are experiencing that emotion. And that's also a really, really helpful separation that I think is important to practice as well.
Yeah, additionally, I also believe that it's not about getting it perfect, but about being consistent and being
Yes.
kind to ourselves more than anyone else.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
How does emotional awareness impact our ability to set boundaries? That's my favorite question.
That's your favorite question, is it? Okay. Setting boundaries. So, the main thing about boundaries is this ability to say no to things is probably the most common thing. People find it hard to say no. And I think one of the reasons why people find it hard to say no is because they're afraid of, well, they're afraid of all kinds of things, upsetting people. They're afraid of not being loved. They're afraid of maybe being shouted at or being ostracized or whatever it might be. And so, again, it's these deeper thoughts that are driving the feeling and the behavior. So, when we take the time to really look at, well, what is it that I find difficult about saying no? What are the deeper thoughts that are there? And if it is this deeper thought of, well, people won't like me, then it's this wonderful invitation to begin to explore that with someone who knows how to help you explore that so that you can free yourself from that thinking. Yeah. So, once you're free of that thinking, then suddenly saying no to somebody becomes a much more accessible thing to do. Because again, you're not placing your layers of belief and thinking over the top of that. It means
Mhm.
that you're probably just making stuff up. And also, if people don't like you saying no, then that's not your stuff. That's not your responsibility to sort out. That's their responsibility to sort out. So the wonderful thing about boundaries also is it's this wonderful invitation to help other people look at their stuff. Yeah. And if you're saying yes to them all the time, then you're not giving them the opportunity to look at the stuff that has them believe that it's okay to put all these ridiculous requests to you that you keep saying yes to.
So, what I understand is it really helps us to recognize when we are actually reaching our limits and need to set boundaries. Is my understanding correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it allows us to set boundaries more skillfully and also and compassionately. And again, it's back to this thing of the clear mirror. If I say no to someone, that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. It means that for whatever reason, I don't want to do this thing for this person. And I can find ways of being able to express that to them. And if they're upset about that, then that's on them. And we can talk about that.
Thanks for sharing that. Now comes my next favorite question. This is basically for the leaders. How can leaders leverage this emotional awareness to create more healthier and more positive work environment?
Well, because leadership is about role modeling, I think when leaders express their vulnerability, when leaders express say, for example, their uncertainty about things, then it allows people to see the leaders that they're following to be human. And that doesn't mean that if you're a leader and you're emotional about something, it doesn't mean that you're a weak leader. It doesn't mean that you're falling apart if you don't know the answers or that you're not sure about what the next step is. But I think people, people aren't stupid. And I think people can really sense when leaders are trying to pull the wool over their eyes or, BS them. So to be really open means that a leader can be honest about, okay, I actually don't know, but again, not that that's like, I don't know what the answer is. So, the whole team or the whole business is going to fall apart. But, I don't know what the answers are, but I am in discussion with people. We are trying to create the answers. I'm open to feedback. I'm open to ideas. Like there's this whole kind of, rather than it being this kind of hierarchical in a vertical sense, it becomes this kind of almost like horizontal leadership where people are encouraged to take self-responsibility for the roles that they're playing in their teams and in their organizations. And there's a wonderful book called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. And that talks about very, very specific organizations back in 2014, I think 2013, 14, when he was doing the research for the book, where he's really spotlighting emotionally intelligent leaders who are willing to be open and vulnerable, but also to hand over responsibility to all the people in the organization, right? So that they can self-manage, that they can self-lead. Yeah. And it just creates this wonderful environment of people wanting to do their best and people taking real responsibility for the roles that they play and the impact that they have on their team and the products that they create and the customer experience that they give. And it's just amazing how people just come alive when they're given the opportunity to be really self-responsible. And it isn't for everyone. There are lots of people out there that don't want to be responsible. They just want to be able to hand over responsibility. But it depends what kind of a leader you want to be. And I
Yeah.
think, if you want to be a leader who is emotionally intelligent, but is surrounded by people who are self-responsible, then, I think being emotionally literate and being emotionally vulnerable is a really, really important part of that.
I quite appreciate how you highlighted the role of emotional awareness in building trust. And when we do that, especially during the challenging times, we are actually creating a space where people feel safe to express themselves and know that their feelings matter and they are important.
Definitely.
Yeah. As we are at the end of this conversation, I would like to know what's your message that you would like to share with our audience who might be struggling to develop emotional awareness.
Well, I would go as far to say that many of the challenges that we face as a humanity are because of a lack of emotional awareness. That lack of emotional awareness allows us to be unkind to ourselves, cruel to others, to not consider the environment or the planet. And we are at a turning point in our history, in our humanity, where everyone is aware that the climate challenges and the resources of planet Earth are very, very, very quickly diminishing. We collectively we need to do something about it in a coordinated and equal or equitable way. Not equal, but equitable. So if you are in any doubt as to whether this is something that would be of real value to you and the people that you share your lives with, I just want to kind of give you this much, much broader context that actually there is a huge amount at risk in us remaining emotionally unaware. And that is a global thing. But if you zero in on just being like, if you just think for a moment about how unkindly your inner critic speaks to you. Time and again, I hear people talk about how shocked they are at the language that they use to themselves. Like they wouldn't even talk to their enemy that way, but they'll talk to themselves that way. So beginning to cultivate this wonderful, loving, compassionate relationship with yourself has got to be at the core of that. And once we do start to do that, then we find just spontaneously and organically, we start to express ourselves more kindly and compassionately to others. And we start to behave in a much more kind and compassionate way towards, again, not just other people, but the planet and our environment and our communities and all of that as well. So my parting message, if you like, is, just start something small. And if all it does is means that you can have a more loving relationship with yourself, then humanity and the world will benefit as a result.
And I think it's all about taking those small, consistent steps and giving ourselves permission to not have to figure it all right away.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a learning process. And
Mhm.
we learn most effectively when we are in action, when we're on the field and we're making mistakes and we're failing and we're getting things wrong, but we're also getting things right. Yeah. And we're learning through experience. And it's that trial and error that means that we move forward.
I can definitely say for anyone listening right now who feels stuck, I think your words offer a lot of hope.
I hope so. I hope so.
And with that, we are almost at the end of this episode. David, thank you so much for taking the time to share your valuable insights on emotional awareness. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on my show, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure our audience will find this episode incredibly valuable as they continue on their own journeys of emotional awareness and emotional growth. So, thank you so much, David. It was lovely talking to you. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to my podcast and share it with your loved ones too. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot, and I am looking forward to catching up with you all again soon in another episode. Until then, take care and be emotionally aware. Bye.